Welcome to another Scotland Today. On this day, the 12th of May 2000, police issued a renewed appeal for information in one of Scotland's most chilling unsolved Gangland double murders. The renewed appeal focused on an isolated stretch of land near Monklands Bridge on the A73 in North Lanarkshire, a place investigators now believed had been the setting for a pre-arranged meeting that ended not in negotiation or resolution, but in the execution of two men, John Nisbet and William Lindsay. Officers urged anyone who had lived, worked or had travelled through the area on the night of Tuesday the 12th of October 1999 to come forward, no matter how insignificant their information might seem, because in a case sharpened by fear and silence, even the smallest detail could prove decisive. 25-year-old John Henry Nisbet from Craigneuk and 26-year-old William Lindsay from Motherwell were last seen alive on the evening of Tuesday the 12th of October 1999, driving through the west of Scotland in a white Peugeot 406, which belonged to John Nisbet's father, and a car that would soon become one of the most important pieces of evidence in a rapidly expanding murder inquiry. At around 8:45 p.m, John and William were seen in Hamilton, but from that moment on, they simply vanished from sight. There would be no further confirmed sightings, no phone calls that led to safety, and no indication that the night ahead would end in anything other than catastrophe. Police would later come to believe that John, a well-known underworld figure, and William, John's driver, were travelling not to escape danger, but towards it, driving north to attend a meeting that had been arranged in advance, involving at least two other men who arrived separately, and whose identities would become the subject of years of speculation, intelligence reports, and unanswered questions. The meeting location, investigators now believed, was land adjacent to the North Calder Water and Shot's Burn, near Monklands Bridge, a quiet and dark area, far removed from witnesses and streetlights, chosen not by chance, but for its isolation. It was here, detectives believed, that a confrontation took place, followed by a pursuit across uneven ground, ending with gunfire delivered at close range, precise and merciless. Both John and William were shot multiple times in the head at close range with a Magnum-style gun, and while forensic evidence suggests at least one of them was killed at that location, officers weren't ruling out the possibility that both men met their deaths there, before what followed next. John and William's bodies were then loaded into the boot of the Peugeot they had arrived in, and it was driven more than 40 miles east, across central Scotland, in a journey that speaks not only to planning, but to confidence, as those responsible believed they had both the time and the control to erase what they had done. At about 11:40 p.m. that night, flames were seen flickering in a field near Elphinstone, East Lothian. This was the flames from John and William's bodies being set alight. It wouldn't be until the early hours of Wednesday the 13th of October, when daylight arrived, that retired miner George Fraser, who was walking his dog along a farm track known as the Marshwood, made the discovery that would mark the beginning of one of Scotland's most disturbing unsolved murders. One body lay partially clothed, face down on scorched ground, as though a fire had been deliberately built around it, and shortly afterwards, police located a second body nearby. Both men had been shot, both had been burned, and the fire, investigators would conclude, was not the cause of death, but an attempt to destroy evidence, to delay identification, and to send a message. The scale of the police response was immediate and extensive, with up to 60 officers from Lothian and Borders Police and Strathclyde Police drafted into the inquiry. An incident room was established and appeals issued across multiple communities. The Peugeot was found burned out in Salisbury in Lanarkshire the following day, confirming that the vehicle itself had been part of the crime, used first to transport the victims and then destroyed. The victims' families told detectives that personal belongings the men had been carrying were missing, items that would later become the focus of repeated searches as officers attempted to recover anything that might link the killers to the scene or to the journey that followed. From the outset, police described the murders as vicious and calculated, hallmarks of a gangland execution carried out by individuals who relied not just on violence, but on the expectation that fear would prevent witnesses from speaking. In January 2000, 5 men were detained, including 2 men questioned on suspicion of murdering John Nisbet and William Lindsay, and 3 others were held in connection with allegedly attempting to pervert the course of justice. All were released without charge, as forensic tests continued, including DNA profiling, ballistic analysis, and the painstaking comparison of soil, water, and sediment recovered from clothing and vehicles. By February, the senior officer leading the inquiry confirmed that police believed they had identified the prime suspects and that reports naming individuals were being prepared for the Procurator Fiscal, but that the case depended heavily on forensic evidence, strong enough not just to accuse, but to withstand scrutiny in court. As the months passed, divers searched burns, officers combed land near Monklands Bridge, and items of clothing were recovered and examined, while detectives confirmed that scientific analysis had finally allowed them to pinpoint the likely murder location, leading directly to the renewed appeal issued on this day, the 12th of May, 2000. Police urged anyone who had seen vehicles, heard discussions, or noticed anything out of place that night to come forward, stressing that even after months of silence, the case was still active and still solvable. Despite reports being submitted, suspects being named, and belief within the investigation that responsibility was known, no one was ever charged. And as years passed, the murders of John Nisbet and William Lindsay slipped from headlines, but never from memory. Later media reporting would identify Lee Smith as a prime suspect, noting that the last phone call made by John Nisbet had been to him, and that police intelligence linked him to organised crime, drug trafficking, and violence. Yet suspicion alone was never enough to secure a conviction, and the case remained unsolved. When Lee Smith died in 2006, his assets were later seized under proceeds of crime legislation, but the murders themselves remained untouched by legal closure, leaving John Nisbet and William Lindsay's families without answers, and investigators without resolution. Over 2 decades later, that still remains the case. Thanks for listening to this short Scotland Today episode. I hope you're finding them interesting. If you'd like to find out more about this case, you can find all the sources I used for this episode by visiting scottishmurders.com/episodes/Nisbet and Lindsay, which you'll find a link to in the show notes. I hope you'll join us at the end of the month for another Scotland Today, this time from 1905. But until then, remember, look after yourselves and keep an eye on those shadows.
Scottish Murders is a production of Clurin Ton.